As promised, joining us on The Final Word today is someone well known to our audiences. Most of the time, our live audiences. He's been on stage with Jeff and me in Adelaide and in London, but never, I don't think anyway, on the podcast proper before. He's here promoting a book. It's the Finn Ashes File. Stephen Finn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back, and to be on the actual podcast as opposed to a live one's a pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent the last, 2 or 3 days, Jeff and I, out there trying to sell books, wearing out the shoe leather, so to speak. But you did all of that last week. I mean, it's quite the experience, isn't it, being on the trail, as it were. I was going to say the election trail. It's not quite that, but there are some similarities, right? When you get your interview to interview and you're telling similar stories, you've got to kind of stay on message and get the job done.
Yeah, certainly. There's a hint of politics in it, isn't there? But it's certainly been hectic. It's been great. I actually really enjoyed the process of doing the book, and then the media stuff that's come with it on top of the build up to the Ashes as well has been quite intense. But it's a good time to be releasing a cricket book, as I'm sure you're aware, Adam. And it's. Hopefully people enjoy it, and my story and my relationship with the Ashes is the centre point of it.
Well, you're an old hat at this now. I suppose you've been doing so much excellent media work in the last few years as your career transitioned from being a player to a pundit that maybe this type of thing comes more naturally. Not saying for a moment that you didn't tell good stories before when you were just out of the game or when we were doing live shows with you, but I suppose with time comes a degree of familiarity with your stories and now willing to commit them to print.
Yeah, I think also the fact that I kept diaries through my Ashes tours helped transport me back to those moments, I think, and clearly my memories of those moments are quite vivid, both good and bad, in a few of the Ashes series that I went on down under, but certainly reconnecting with very specific times and days and feelings in those moments certainly helped, and they're extract throughout the book from the diary, hence it's called the Ashes Files, because they've kind of got the receipts for how I was feeling at the time, both good and bad. So yeah, it was quite eye-opening, and at times there are moments in there where you're screaming at the 21-year-old version of myself, like, don't be a moron, stop beating yourself up, you're taking wickets in an Ashes series, it could be a lot worse. So really going through it and actually writing the book was quite cathartic, but again, something I've really enjoyed. And at the end of it, with the help of Matt Roller, who was the ghostwriter for me, in conjunction with each other, I think we made it sound like me. And it really has been a good process.
It's a bit of an old soul thing to do, keeping a diary. I mean, we're not the same age, but we're not, a million years apart either. Like, I don't think many people sort of in their teens into their 20s through their careers sort of think to keep as time or as it's happening, a recollection of what's going on in their lives. So what was at that age, the catalyst for you deciding to document all of this, good and bad?
Angus Fraser, to be honest. He said to me before my first Ashes tour, because I think people were wary when I was 21 years old, going over to Australia, having only played Test cricket for 9 months or so. I think he was quite wary of the fact that it can be damaging to go on an Ashes tour and for it to go badly. So his idea was to be able to just jot down how I was feeling at the end of each day and the thoughts that were going through my mind in order to park them, to be able to move on to the next, and then to reconnect with them at times if I felt as though I needed to. So that was the catalyst really for it in 2010-11. So the diaries start off quite simple and candid about me going for dinner, about being really excited about playing in that first Test match at Brisbane, saying it's going to be the biggest Test match of my life, the biggest moment of my life, and it was. And then the come down towards the end of the tour where you get dropped and you're left out the team and you're fighting the battles inside your own head then, about trying to figure out how you're going to find your way and fight your way back into the team. Yeah, they're quite a stark contrast between the two, and they're only 6 weeks apart.
You kind of already touched on this, but when reading some of the more challenging passages, did you sort of identify with that younger version of yourself? Did you sort of feel great sympathy, empathy to a point because it is you, but sympathy as well? Like, I wish I could just make it better for you.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a part in there because I'm 36 now and I have had those good and bad experiences, and I'm probably a far more well-rounded person now than I was then. I've got a daughter that gives you perspective, and all these things have happened since that mean that you're looking back on those diaries and looking back on those entries, just thinking, how can your mind be thinking like this? How can you find yourself so tangled? And so at times, especially in 2013-14, when I got sent home, so out of love with a game that you adore, and that gradually over time I've fallen back in love with. And now being a pundit, I've got the best job in the world. You get to sit behind the bowler's arm and watch a sport that I'm really passionate about. But there are certainly times in the book and in the diaries where I reflect on just my relationship with cricket and how at times it beat me up.
It can be quite an intimate process sharing a diary as well, right? And having not only sharing it with the public, but kind of really going into that with your ghostwriter, Matt Roller. I went through that process with Glenn Maxwell last year. He didn't keep contemporaneous notes, but his mind's remarkable. He remembers everything. So I had the benefit of his recollections, and Matt had the benefit of your diaries. But yeah, talk me through that, the relationship with Matt, Heavy Roller, a regular co-host here on The Final Word and a good friend of the show as well, about how you two came to work together and how you found that process in sharing with him everything you needed to share with him in order for him to be able to tap into your soul, I suppose.
Yeah, well, Matt approached me first. I have been approached a few times before to think about doing it, but that just never felt like the right time. Didn't feel like I was detached enough from my career to be able to reflect completely honestly about how I was feeling at the time. I think you need to be a little bit more removed for it to be a really true, honest reflection. So we got together at the right time, first and foremost. I told him that I had these diaries, which also helped. I have a good memory with stuff as well, but it's like specific conversations that I had with people at those times that are documented in the diary, that help really make the story vivid. I think he saw me cry probably more times than I'm comfortable with throughout the process of writing the book as well, because of touching on those really tricky moments and the feelings of shame and embarrassment and stuff that I felt at times throughout my career. It was certainly difficult for him probably to sit there and watch me crying across the table in a coffee shop. But again, in order to really hit the spots in the book that we wanted to, it was a necessary process. So yeah, he's a great man, Matt,
Yep.
and yeah, I think we did a really good job together.
I love that. I mean, that's the texture, the magic dust in a ghosted book. I think where the subject and the writer are really intertwined. Like, because the truth is, you see a lot of books out there where the subject has barely read them. I can think of some in the last few years where it's very obvious the subject's barely read them, let alone written them. Where you've clearly gone the other way, gone kind of all in and committed emotionally to the all in process, which must mean at the end of it, when you got the book in your hand, when you open that box, you must have been very, very proud.
Yes, and that's something that I'm not the sort of guy who's going to be writing 4 or 5 books throughout their career or their life. This was probably my only opportunity to do something like this, and I wanted it to, one, sound like me, and clearly when you're going through the process of writing a book, and the first couple of chapters you go through and you edit quite a lot to edit phrases and words and stuff, but then as you and the ghostwriter become more entwined, as you work through the book, he really starts to find your voice, and then you're only editing little bits from there. So yeah, it's certainly something that I was really, really keen to do, even though I couldn't write it myself because it's a huge time commitment and I've not written a book before. I wanted to find someone who would be really enthusiastic about capturing my voice, and I think we did that. And yeah, I had some long late nights towards the submission of the final draft, where I was double checking, triple checking, going through the book 4 times in order to really try and hone in on those moments in it that I felt were important. And yeah, I am really proud of it. When you get it in your hand, when you get that hardback in your hand, it's something to be proud of.
I know it's a personal memoir, so it's less about kind of, I don't know, score settling or squaring up with others. But, to a point, you are narrating other people's stories too, right? The nature of a diary is it's your perspective on other people's lives and so on. And I mean, that must have been part of this, right? Knowing that you were going to be writing about your experience, but shared experiences too, and trying to make sure you could be as close to everyone's truth as is possible.
Yeah, and through the process, we did reconnect with people who are pivotal people within the book as well. So it was important, we felt, in order to tell that true story, that there was some degree of corroboration in there as well, that it wasn't just this fantasy that was all seen through my eyes, that no one else agreed with. So yeah, there were moments in the book where I don't think I'm critical of people, because at the end of the day, I have always said that I am 100% responsible for the things that happened in my career, and that's both good and bad. But mostly when you're looking at the bad moments, I think it's really easy sometimes for people to just point the finger elsewhere and say it was them, not me. Whereas I take 100% responsibility for the tangles that I got myself in, for the mess that I got myself in, for where my mind went when it was bad. But I think these are honest reflections, and I think that's the way that I want the book to be perceived, and the way that I hope the book is received when it's taken, when people read it, is that these are just my honest musings and reflections as to really pivotal moments in my career, but also my life, because they've helped shape me to the person that I am now.
Yeah, what jumped out at me when going through it was that your cricketing career is weirdly a short one. And I don't mean, obviously, you made your first class debut at 16 and you played for a long time deep into your 30s. But the England bit, which everybody remembers, the vast majority of that happens in sort of a 3 or 4 year accelerated burst when you're on the scene so quickly to 50 test wickets. Part of that 10-11 side, and we'll come to that in a moment, playing Ashes cricket again 4 years after that, again in 2015. I mean, really, that's 5 years out of your 36 where there is so much attention on you in those contests. And you'll probably spend, at least to an extent, the rest of your life talking about those 5 years. It's an interesting thing where something you've done as a very young man in your early to mid-20s will be, well, they'll be the stories professionally as a cricketer that you tell kind of forever.
Yeah, it is mad when you think of it like that, because I played my last game for England in 2017 when I'd just turned 28 years old. I played my first game when I was 20. So I had this 7 year, probably 8 season period where I was an England player, and almost exclusively an England player. I would go back and play as often as I could for Middlesex in between there. But I was on a central contract that entire time. I was in most of the squads for every format at that time. But to think now, as a commentator, if you see a 28-year-old coming into the side, you think, wow, he's not young, but he's pretty green, he's fresh, he's had a good domestic career, but now he's got his opportunity in his late 20s through to his early 30s to really make his mark on international cricket. Whereas I kind of did it in reverse. I did that at 20, 21 years old, and then faded away towards the end of my career because of injury problems and lack of form as a result of that. And yeah, it is weird to think that a majority of the thing that people remember me for was done by the age of, well, realistically 27 when I played my last test match.
Yeah, absolutely. And and you kind of front foot this by doing the unselectable thing. Well, not selectable is the quote, isn't it? The Ashley Giles quote. Like quite
Unselectable.
early on. Unselectable. Sorry, non-select. I'm trying to remember get it right. I've confused myself. But yeah, the front footing that. I mean, to think how young you would have been when that happened. To think the standards that you're being held to, and I know that, and you document this beautifully. I mean, how challenging it was, and maybe we can revisit it here. But yeah, the decision to make that a fairly central piece in explaining your state of mind there and the diary entry that accompanies it.
Yeah, that is the absolute rock bottom of my career. There's no doubt, being sent home from that Australia tour with my head in an absolute tangle and just completely burnt out at chasing myself into circles, into a corner where I felt like I couldn't get out of it. And that's when the diary entries are at their most extreme and their most harsh. And when you're reading it back, you're reading it thinking, just give yourself a break, like just take a step back from this. But I never felt like that was an option, and it's not something that I was ever willing to do. I thought that working harder, putting myself under more pressure, would eventually mean that I would come through the other side of my problems, and that was just not the case. And now when you're removed from that, you can really resonate with the fact that obviously the more you beat yourself up, the more pressure you put yourself under, the less likely you're going to find rhythm as a bowler. So yeah, the book is a story for me, and it's the story of this guy who burst onto the scene at 20 years old, did relatively well in my early test career, and then within the space of about 6 to 8 months, I'd gone from being one of the playing every game in every format for England to being not selectable or unselectable in this 6 to 8 month period, and then trying to fight my way back out of that corner to come back at Edgbaston in 2015. And that's the story arc that I wanted this to follow. So the early part of the book, my early career is one chapter. The end is right at the end, is one chapter, but the bulk of the story is that trough and how I came out of it.
Yeah, it sort of feels like a lot of the book is rationalizing what you didn't achieve, perhaps,
Yeah.
rather than, and kind of getting used to the idea of being really proud of, 125 Test wickets, 3 Ashes wins, some extraordinary spells, part of the 10-11 team, the Mike Hussey dismissal in Adelaide, which was so crucial to that win for England in that successful series, the 6 for at Brisbane, the spell at when you're on a hat trick on day one of the series in 2013. I mean, there are so many very high moments, like trying to, I suppose, be at peace with them and accept that they are such a part of your story, and not spending as much time dwelling on, not having taken 300 of those things, and instead being more satisfied with the 125 you did. Would that be a fair depiction of, how the book has, in some respects, been set up in your mind?
Yes, I think that would be an accurate representation, because I've spent most of my career since I stopped playing for England thinking that I'd failed and that I'd let myself down and that I'd let everyone around me down for only taking 254 international wickets and only playing for 7 or 8 years in international cricket and not 15. And even when I retired in my later years, when still my body was giving up, my knee wouldn't brace, I had 3 knee surgeries, back spasms, back injections to try and keep myself on the park in the hope that one day I would rediscover the youthfulness or the zip or the bowler that I was. I think when I accepted that had passed, then it was easier to take a step back and look more broadly at my career and be proud of what I achieved. And some of those big moments and series that I played in, and the fantastic players that I played around as well. I mean, some of the guys that I've been lucky enough to share a dressing room with for a long time are some of the best players that will ever play for England. And that is something now that I'm really proud of, that I was in that team, in that environment, accepted by those guys, and what I felt at the time was quite a big part of that team. But when you're in it, you always want more. And if you've just won an Ashes series, you're moving on to the next thing to think, right, what's next? You don't actually appreciate it in the moment. So, yeah, as time has passed, I've become far more at peace with my career. But certainly, whilst I was still playing, and especially in that grey area between not playing for England and then those next couple of years of domestic cricket before COVID, were probably the most challenging of my career.
Barney Douglas documentary from, gosh, it was probably 2019, The Edge, which goes into the dressing room that you were very much part of and going to the top of the world and winning in Australia. You did a great job there of articulating the devastation of being dropped on Boxing Day. Really interesting reading your perspective here. Like, obviously in a documentary, it's a truncated version. It's with years of hindsight to reflect on it through. But here, I mean, how raw it was for you in those bathrooms at the MCG when you were told by Strauss and Co that you wouldn't be there the next day.
Yeah, that was, and at the time I hadn't really ever been dropped in my career. I hadn't been delivered that bad news that you're not playing tomorrow. But I played Test cricket. I played every Test up until that point. When I played first class cricket, I pretty much played every game, bar a few, up until that point as well. So yeah, that was the first moment that anyone had took me aside in a dressing room and said, you're not playing tomorrow. You're not going to be part of the team. And clearly the Boxing Day Test is something that every English player dreams of playing. You wake up when you're a youngster to watch it on the TV, and to have the opportunity to maybe play in it, but then feel as though through your own fault that you've thrown it all away, were feelings and thoughts at that time that I struggled to deal with. Yeah, so I spent a bit of the next day moping around. Got told to snap the fuck out of it by the S&C coach at the time, which was a valid point, because you don't want those types of people in and around the dressing room. And then it was very much just a quest to try and fight my way back into that team. And it took a little while, because of the fantastic players that came in and took my place, for me to fight my way back into it.
The story you're telling there about Alistair Cook, like, almost dragging you out of your hotel room to
Yeah.
celebrate after Melbourne. It's quite relatable, I think. If you're a part of a squad but not part of a team that's gone and had this historic win, and we got a bit of an insight to it at the time when you would occasionally be the butt of the jokes on the Graham Swan videos in the 10-11 Ashes as well, and as the kid in the team and so on. But yeah, again, going back to that, and they did try to keep you as level-headed as possible when you were going through the despair of having been left out of that team that was achieving great things.
Yeah, and I think everyone who'd been on an Ashes series before knew the gravity of what we were achieving at the time, and certainly as a 21-year-old at the time, I was clearly very naive to what Ashes cricket was away from home, because I'd watched it on the TV, but until you've experienced it and you lived it, you don't fully or truly appreciate how intense it is. Or as an English player, once you step off the plane, the intensity that you are greeted with in Australia, which we're kind of seeing now with the way the guys have been greeted by the newspaper headlines and the press in Perth before this series. So it's only at the time I didn't quite appreciate. I just thought, well, we're going to do this again in 4 years' time. It's going to be great. I'll have an opportunity then to come down and be playing that Boxing Day test and win the Ashes down here again. Clearly, it's not quite happened. It's not quite worked out for England since then. But yeah, at the time, fighting with those feelings of just feeling like it was I'd thrown my opportunity away to play in a Boxing Day test.
And I mean, the story between the Ashes to me is interesting because I was living and playing cricket in England in 2012, and I remember like all the hype around your return that summer and the pace you were bowling with, and so on. And of course, you know, we've talked in the live shows before about the Graham Smith bit with the kicking the stumps and the laws of the game being changed and so on. But like having that second coming, you know, you've done it in Australia. You've been, I can't remember the exact stat, but quickest Englishman to 50 wickets or whatever it was. Youngest, wasn't it? Youngest
Youngest until
Englishman
Shoaib Bashir did me
until
last
Shah
summer.
Bashir. Yeah, that's right. But, you know, the second coming, when you feel like you're at the peak of your powers and almost wrestling with your body to try and give yourself a chance. And maybe that was when you were, you know, at your most dynamic and quickest. It's just that trying to find your way to be a consistent feature of an outstanding team.
Yeah, and that summer actually, 2012, probably was one of the best summers that I had with the ball in terms of I just got to this place of absolute confidence that I was good enough to get anyone in the world out. And I did rediscover that mindset a few times again throughout my career, but certainly that summer of 2012, playing against that South African team, which was the best team that I ever played against. It's actually the only test series that I physically played in that I lost, was that one against South Africa. And you look down their list 1 to 11, and they're all amazing players. So to come back and bowl well against them in that series was something that justified all of the work that I'd put in over the last couple of years, and did. It's not quite an Ashes series, but South Africa is a very challenging series to play against, especially when they were fighting to become number one in the world. And yeah, at that stage in my life, 2012, probably just before I need that stump in at Headingley, it was when I was at my absolutely most confident.
And the summer after that in 2013, I referred to it before, but that, you know, on a hat trick at Trent Bridge goes on to become a really famous England victory, that by far the high watermark of that series, a thrilling Ashes win. And again, like bowling like the absolute wind, Trent Bridge going absolutely wild. I mean, these are moments that anyone would give anything for. And, you know, you get back in the diary into the weeds of all of this, and the quirk of not playing the whole way through the series will come to in a moment. But one of those high moments of running in and running through the Aussies.
Yeah, it was, and I had to open the bowling that evening because Stuart Broad got hit on the shoulder, and he was off icing his shoulder because he couldn't move. So I had to take the new ball with Jimmy, and I think it was Watson and then Ed Cowan in consecutive balls, and then beat Michael Clarke's outside edge by a millimetre for the hat trick ball, which would have been an amazing feeling. I think I was on a hat trick 2 or 3 times in Ashes test matches and never actually got one. But yeah, to feel that crowd behind you, but deep down, and this is the thing where the perception of you within that game, I didn't bowl amazingly. I had a couple of good spells. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. And even though it was an amazing feeling to be on that hat trick, to have bowled that evening and left us in a pretty good position in the game, I still knew that deep down something wasn't quite right, and that was just a feeling that I couldn't shift, and that's why I got dropped for the second test.
Yeah, so you left out, but Andy Flower, it's a good little nugget here, keeps you warming up in your spikes until just before the toss, in order to not give anything away to Australia about whether you would or wouldn't play. I mean, it's a little bit of an insight to the way that Andy Flower goes about things, leaving absolutely nothing to chance, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Andy is meticulous. And at the time, we needed that meticulous style coach to get the best out of the huge personalities in the team and to be able to manage those personalities to be a team. Clearly, 8 months later, it all fell apart whilst we were in Australia. But whilst it was good with that team and the great players that we had in it, it was amazing. But yeah, certainly that morning where then I messed up my lines to the Queen as well, not long after missing out on a Ashes Test match at my home ground, a ground where I had such a good record as well in Lords. It was that was bitterly disappointing. But I walked out in trainers and I went out there because I was like, well, I'm not going to have a bowl this morning. Why would I have a bowl? So I walk out there to the warm up in trainers, have a bit of a kick around, field some balls, and then go back inside. And Flower didn't like naming the team until the toss, until the coin went up and the captains exchanged the team sheets. He didn't want Australia to know that we were making the change, that Bresnan was coming in for me. So yeah, he saw me walking out in trainers and he told me, get the fuck back upstairs and put your trainers on. So I had to turn on my heels and sprint with about 2 minutes until team time. I had to sprint back up through the long room, put my spikes on, and then 1 minute later was down on the ground for the warm-ups to start, but in my spikes this time.
But that brutal, 10 test series is what it becomes in the end, and ultimately the end of the Flower era, isn't it? 13-14 in Australia. I mean, really brutal reflections on, when you're so low in Perth and Melbourne. Like, I remember going to those test matches and,
neither can I.
I mean, you're not playing, right? But like, you're part of the England Ashes squad. But this is just like, bowling so much that hoping that you will break down. Like, at some level, at some deeper level, wanting to get hurt. To think how unhealthy a spot that was for you to be at that particular moment in time, and it cascades from there. But just that feeling before it gets to the not selectable, unselectable, that idea of bowling.
Yeah,
so
I
much
think
that you
in
want
that
to get
moment, I wasn't willing, especially because of the reception that Jonathan Trott had walking away from the tour. Well, not sorry, Trotty didn't walk away from the tour, but he felt as though he couldn't continue because he was so burnt out. He didn't walk away from it. It's important to get that right. He didn't feel as though he could continue because of his burnout. But I remember seeing the reception to him and the headlines and the back pages and even the front pages in some newspapers. So as I knew that I was losing the battle inside my own head in that tour, probably about 6 weeks into it, it was like going to training every day and just standing and whacking your head against a brick wall for 2 hours and then going back to the hotel. And you'd be exhausted and you would go to the ground again and you'd do it all again the next day. So there's no doubt in my mind that it would have been kinder to send me home much earlier in that tour because people could see that I wasn't making progress and that I was beating myself up more and more and more in order to try and make it right and working harder and harder in order to try and make it right. So it got to a point where I was like, well, the only way I can go home and be at peace with it is if I get injured and that my body gives up on me. And then you can almost hide behind that. I think that's where my head was. So yeah, I would try and push myself. I would try and bowl loads. I would try and do everything I could to effectively injure myself in those couple of weeks there where I didn't see a way out of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to kind of consider that as a bystander years later. I suppose now, 12 years on, 12, 13 years on, whatever it's been, there would be better infrastructure in place. It wouldn't get to the Ashley Giles moment. It wouldn't get to the point where you felt like you were being let down by the administration.
Yeah, and I think that's just a sign of the times. I think then I don't think people had as much clarity or as much acceptance that it was okay for people not to feel amazing all the time. I think it's far easier to have those conversations now, and I think that there would be far more checkpoints with people to make sure that everything's okay now. And with some high-profile players taking breaks because of their mental health and stuff like that, I just think it's far more accepted that people do struggle in that department and that you're not completely immune to it just because you're a professional sportsman who's being paid to do something that they love, for which we're very lucky, and that's not lost on anyone who plays professional sport. But yeah, certainly the conversations I think would be easier to have now, and I think the situation would be managed far better now than it was then. Was I let down by the administration? I just think there wasn't the awareness, to be honest, as opposed to being completely let down.
Yeah, I think you look back at it now, again, there's plenty of hindsight being applied to this, but they should have just invented something to have sent you home, right? Like that would have been the smart thing to have done, when instead of subjecting you to the inevitable headlines and the way it all played out at the end of that trip, unselectable and so on, they could have done something to have gotten you on the plane without that. But I suppose that's an emblem of where England's tour had gone completely off the rails and you ended up being inadvertently collateral damage.
Yeah, I think I'd say that's pretty accurate. I think that Ashley Giles was only being honest in what he said. He was looking at me bowling in the nets, and even though I could compete to a certain extent, actually putting me out there in an international game would have been very different. So he was only being honest in what he said, but I think now there'd be a lot more nuance about how that is communicated or the reasons for which someone is going home. You would say that that would be far more nuanced as well. So yeah, certainly it would have been different.
A nice bit about Mitchell Johnson. So, when things weren't going well and you're in the dressing rooms in Sydney with him for some of those, classic post-series beers in 13, 14. And, he'd been through, and not something a million miles away from what you'd gone through a couple of years prior. And, of course, he came back to being the defining bowler of that series. And, you do get back by, 2015. It's 18 months of hard work, but to an extent, the foundation might have been laid by an adversary in Mitchell Johnson.
Yeah, and that's something that when we came to the 2015 series in England at the Oval Test, when the teams came and had a beer together in the home dressing room, I sought out Mitchell Johnson, or you seek out everyone in that environment because everyone chats to everyone. But I remember going and finding Mitchell Johnson and just saying, like, I really appreciate the words that you had for me in 2013, 14. You might not have realized the impact that it had on me because I'm sure he was just chatting to us at the end of the series, and I was asking questions and being inquisitive about his journey back to being the absolute demon that he was in 2013, 14. And I found it fascinating the method that he used and how simple it was, and I kind of used that as a blueprint and as a mantra to try and build myself back up from when I hit my lowest moment when I got sent home from that tour. So yeah, we swapped shirts. I'm not sure if he still has the shirt that I gave him, but I wrote a message on it that said, thanks so much for our chat in the dressing room at Sydney. You probably don't realise how much of an impact that had on me. All the best, Stephen Finn. And he wrote me a shirt just saying, because I took my 100th test wicket in that game, he said, congrats on your 100 wickets. Many more to come. Be your best mate, Mitchell Johnson. So yeah, it was just a nice moment in between the rivalry that comes with the Ashes series and the heat of the battle. For someone who was so intimidating in that series to pull his mask down and really help me in that moment was something that I've always appreciated.
It is lovely stuff. And I think there is this great, I know it's a short career, but the end of it in some respects, certainly as far as Australia is concerned in 15, you have that day out at Edgbaston, you play a massive role. I remember Chris Rogers said to me at some stage or another, possibly on air, that when you were bowling rockets, and you obviously great mates with Bucky and so on, but when he was reflecting on his retirement at the end of that series, it was in no small part due to how quickly you were bowling and how he realised there was a moment there. And I think it was at Edgbaston when he's like, this might get dangerous for me here. Like, to get the whole machine cranking the way you want it to and to have one last defining Ashes performance. And remember, that came after you guys were rolled at Lords. Like, you needed to bounce back at Edgbaston, and knowing you played a massive hand in that huge test victory, which led towards England winning the Ashes in 2015.
Yeah, that's probably the proudest moment of my professional life. I'd say that moment of being at the end of my mark for my first over in that game from the Birmingham end, and I think it was about the 7th or 8th over. I got quite an early bowl and there were very favourable conditions, and I just had to trust the process that I'd been through for the last couple of years. I had to trust all the work that I'd done, and I just let everything go. I stood at the back of my mark and I said, just trust it, run in and just try and bowl your best ball. And you get that first one out the way, there's that big sigh of relief. And then later in that over, Steve Smith hits me for 4. And it leaves you questioning and wondering, thinking, man, am I ready to do this? Should I be here? Do I deserve it? Or all those bad memories going to come flooding back? and then to nick him off at the back end of that over, and to see it looping towards Alistair Cook at slip, and he grabs it just off the ground. If I could relive one moment of my professional life again, it would be that split second from the ball leaving my fingertips to watching Smith edge it and then Cook catching it, and the big release of emotion that I had as a celebration as a result of that is something that I would pay a lot of money to relive. And how the rest of that chess match transpired as well. It was just like dreaming. And yeah, there were moments in that test where I just couldn't sleep because I was so excited that all I wanted to do was get back to the ground and bowl. I wanted someone to give me my bowling boots, give me a cricket ball, and just to go and bowl and bowl and bowl until I couldn't bowl anymore because it felt so good.
Oh, what a joy. I mean, they're so fleeting, those moments in cricket life more widely. And, it's special. They used that as a promotional shot for years, the ECB, didn't they? That celebration of you getting Smith and sort of turning, my 180-degree celebration and thrusting your fist in the air. And I remember that as a striking memory of that week in Birmingham.
I don't think I could do it now, Colo. I think I'd break my back and be back in hospital with my knees.
I mean, weirdly, you do end up on another Ashes trip, and it's almost not worth remarking upon. 17, 18 after you've lost your contract, you don't spend very long there. But, there is an instructive piece there about Andrew Strauss singling you out, sort of to an extent at Heathrow in relation to the Joss Butler stag do photos of you getting, family show, but who cares, waving a dildo around and so on. I mean, it's more quirky than anything else. It's more colour. But, I mean, how you ended up, Ken talked about collateral damage earlier, kind of collateral damage on the Ben Stokes saga through that whole period of time when he got in trouble at Bristol and the team was under the pump for other reasons.
Yeah, it certainly was. It was a weird time in my life because you're not on the Ashes tour, and then you are on the Ashes tour, and then you're there thinking, okay, this is another opportunity. This is another chance. I took a 8 for at the end of the season for Middlesex at Lords to give us the chance of staying in Division 1, which we ended up not being able to do. But I had this moment there during the 8 for after the Ashes squad had been picked. Where I was thinking, I'm back here. This is the best version of me again. And then having those memories going to Australia, thinking, okay, this is another chance of redemption. Going to Australia after what happened last time, can I rediscover that form? Can I find the form that I felt whilst I was bowling during that 8 for? And then it was batting in the nets that I just turned one off my hip into the net on the onside, went to pick it up out of the net and ended up in a heap because a massive bit of cartilage had dislodged and shifted between the bones in my knee, and I couldn't move. Literally couldn't move. It was agonizing. And we had a number of injections, a number of scans, and nothing was working to make my knee feel better again. So again, I ended up off home, sent home from an Ashes tour, but this time because my body had let me down.
And the quirk of it is that you'll now be on your 5th consecutive Ashes trip because you were one of the very few people who made it out from England for the 21-22 series. I think, all of us who were on that tour working consider it the worst series ever to work on because of the COVID restrictions and the shambles that it was. But it did mean that you had the chance to, I guess, first get the chance at least to be a pundit in Australia and develop that other side of your career. And it happened quickly, but there you were. You're in situ commentating on BBC, on ABC, of course, as well as part of that relationship. And now a cycle on from that, this 25, 26 Ashes, you'll be prominent. You'll be in Australia doing TV, doing radio, I'm sure doing plenty of other gigs as well, and really owning your position, your second career as a commentator and as a pundit.
Yeah, it's something that I'm really grateful that I've been able to go and do after being a player. The next best way to soak up the atmosphere of being there at the ground is by being a pundit. And the thing I'm most excited about this series is that first morning being out there as the national anthems are sung and everyone's going nuts in the crowd, and you can feel the atmosphere get into fever pitch to the point where that first ball is bowled. Being out there and being able to just soak it up firsthand is going to be something that when you're playing, you kind of insulate yourself from the atmosphere, you insulate yourself from all of the other stuff that comes with it, and you find a way of getting this tunnel vision that helps you focus on just delivering the ball as a bowler or just watching the ball as a batter. So you don't fully appreciate those moments when you're a player, I don't think. But even though I was there in Australia last time, we covered the first test off tube because we couldn't get into Brisbane. And then I ended up doing the Melbourne test from my hotel room in Adelaide because I caught COVID and had to do co-commentary from a roving mic in Adelaide, thousands of miles away. So, yeah, to be there and to be able to feel the atmosphere, and already the way it's being built up in the press, the way the players are speaking, this is probably the most, or it's not probably, it is definitely the most hotly anticipated Ashes series that I can remember. Even more so than any of the ones that I played in. So it's going to be an amazing few weeks.
We did a panel the other night in the long room, and you're so confident and so competent at describing and articulating your stories and the game more generally. I mean, how would I say this diplomatically? Some cricketers finish their career, end up on TV and radio, and they're relying on, oh, well, I played cricket at a high level, therefore I'll be naturally brilliant at this as well. It strikes me like you've taken more the Atherton Hussain approach, using an England famous duo at Sky, and have really worked hard on your craft to make sure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity to be an excellent broadcaster for a long stretch of time.
I think that's one of the things that really drew me towards doing this when I finished, was the fact that it's a completely new skill to learn. And the thing that I enjoyed as a cricketer was trying to get better all the time. And at times it works for you, at times it doesn't, but you always have that drive to learn and get better and to challenge yourself. And yeah, I love broadcasting, and it's something that I was lucky to fall into somewhat in 2019 when I got a call from Adam Mountford asking if I wanted to go on tour to New Zealand with TMS rather than do winter training with Middlesex. I was like, you don't have to ask me twice, Adam, I'm there. But as it goes on and as it develops, learning to be a good broadcaster and seeing how the really good broadcasters do it. And it's not necessarily the content that comes out of your mouth that you're learning, because your thoughts are your thoughts, but it's how you articulate that, the pace and the rhythm of it in between balls, how you talk over things, especially on the TV, and paint a picture that goes beyond what people are seeing. Yeah, there are certainly skills there that I've really enjoyed trying to learn, and trying to get better at.
Well, it's a pleasure to watch you do it and learn and grow in that job. You're doing a brilliant job, as you have in this book, The Ashes Files, My Pride and Pain in Cricket's Most Intense Series. We'll put all the links in the show notes for people to buy it. You and the Heavy Roller have done a terrific job. Congratulations on the book, and I'll catch you in Perth in a few days.
Cheers, Colo. I'll see you soon.